Hello everybody and welcome back. My continuation of my book reading of Stephen King's Cell. Here we go. They paused near North Endeavour, standing on a pedestrian overpass above Route 495. The clouds were thickening again, but the moon broke through long enough to show them 6 lanes of silent traffic. Near the bridge where they stood, in the southbound lanes, an overturned 16-wheeler lay like a dead elephant. Orange pylons had been set up around it, showing that someone had made at least a token response, and there were 2 abandoned police cruisers beyond them. One on its side, the rear half of the truck had been burned black. There was no sign of bodies, not in the momentary moonlight. A few people labored westward in the breakdown lane, but it was slow going, even there. It kinda makes it all real, doesn't it? Tom said. No, Alice said. She sounded indifferent. To me, it looks like a special effect in some big summer movie. Buy a bucket of popcorn and a Coke and watch the end of the world in, what do they call it? Computer graphic imaging? CGI? Blue screens? Some fucking thing. She held up the little sneaker by one lace. This is all I need to make it real. Something small enough to hold in my hand. Come on, let's go. There were plenty of abandoned vehicles on Highway 28, but it was wide open compared to 495, and by 4 o'clock, they were nearing Methuen, hometown of Mr. Roscoe Hand. He and the stereo flashlights. And they believed enough of Hand's story to want to be undercover well before daylight. They chose a motel at the intersection of 28 and 110. A dozen or so cars were parked in front of the various units, but to Clay they had the abandoned feel. And why wouldn't they? The 2 roads were passable, but only if you were on foot. Clay and Tom stood at the edge of the parking lot, waving their flashlights over their heads. We're okay, Tom called. Normal folks. Coming in. They waited. There was no response. For what the sign identified as a Sweet Valley Inn, heated pool, HBO, group rates. Come on, Alice said. My feet hurt. And it'll be getting light soon, won't it? Look at this, Clay said. He picked up a CD from the motel's turn-in and shoved a beam of flashlight on it. It was Love Songs by Michael Bolton. And you said they were getting smarter, Tom said. Don't be so quick to judge, Clay said, as they started towards the units. Whoever had it threw it away, right? More likely just dropped it, Tom said. Alice shone her own light on the CD. Who is this guy? Honey Bunch? Tom said. You don't want to know? He took the CD and tossed it back over his shoulder. They forced the door on 3 adjoining units as gently as possible so they could at least shoot the bolts. Once they were inside, and with beds to sleep in, they slept most of the day away. They were not disturbed, although that evening Alice said she thought she had heard music coming from far away, but she admitted it might have been part of a dream she was having. There were maps for sale in the lobby of Sweet Valley Inn that would offer more detail than a road atlas. They were in a glass display cabinet that had been smashed. Clay took one for Massachusetts and one for New Hampshire, reaching in carefully so as not to cut his hand, and saw a young man lying on the other side of the reception counter as he did so. His eyes glared sightlessly. For a moment, Clay thought someone had put an oddly colored corsage in the corpse's mouth. Then he saw the greenish points poking out through the dead man's cheeks and realized they matched the broken glass littered the shelves of the display cabinet. The corpse was wearing a name tag that said, "My name is Hank, ask me about the weekly rates." Clay thought briefly of Mr. Riccardi as he looked at Hank. Tom and Alice were waiting for him just inside the lobby door. It's 9:15, and outside it was full dark. "How did you do?" Alice asked. "These may help," he said. He gave her the maps, then lifted the Coleman lantern so she and Tom could study them, compare them against the road atlas, and plot the night's travel. He was trying to cultivate a sense of fatalism about Johnny and Sharon, trying to keep the bald truth of his current family situation front and center in his mind. What had happened in Kent Pond? What had happened? His son and his wife were either alright or they weren't. He wouldn't either find him or he wouldn't. His success at this sort of semi-magical thinking came and went. When it started slipping, he told himself he was lucky to be alive. And this was certainly true. What balanced his good luck out was that he's been in Boston, 100 miles south of Kent Pond, by even the quickest route, which they were definitely not taking. When the pulse happened, and yet he'd fallen in with good people. There was that. People he could think of as friends. He'd seen plenty of others. Beer Cat Guy, the plump Bible toting lady, as well as Mr. Roscoe Hans of Machunin, who weren't as lucky. If he got to you, sure. If Johnny got to you, you better be taking care of him. You must better be. But suppose he had his phone. Suppose he'd taken the red cell phone to school. Might he not been taking it a little bit more often lately? Because so many of the other kids took theirs. Christ. Clay, you alright? Tom asked. Sure, why? I don't know, you look a little grim. That guy behind the counter. He's not pretty. Look here, Alice said, tracing a thread on the map. Squilled it across the state line and then appeared to join New Hampshire Road 38 a little east of Pelham. That looks pretty good to me, she said. If we go west on the highway out there for 8 or 9 miles, she pointed at 110, where both the cars and the tar were gleaming faintly in a misty drizzle. We should hit it. What do you think? I think that sounds good, Tom said. She looked from him to Clay. The little sneaker was put away, probably in her backpack, but Clay could see her wanting to squeeze it. He supposed it was good. She wasn't a smoker. She'd be up to 4 packs a day. If they got the way across guarded, she began. We'll worry about that if we have to, Clay said. But he wasn't worrying. One way or another, he was getting to Maine. If it meant crawling through some pucker brush like an illegal crossing the Canadian border to pick apples in October, he would do it. If Tom and Alice decided to stay behind, that would be too bad. He'd be sorry to leave them, but he would go because he had to know. The red squiggle Alice had found on the Sweet Valley maps had a name. Dusty Stream Road, and it was almost wide open. It was a 4-mile hike to the state line, and they came upon no more than 5 or 6 abandoned vehicles and only a single wreck. They also passed 2 houses where they could see lights and hear the roar of generators. They considered stopping at these, but not for long. We'll probably get into a firefight with some guy defending his heart and home, Clay said, always assuming there's anyone there. Those generators were probably set to come on when the county juice failed, and they'll run until they're out of gas. Even if there are some people and they let us in, which would hardly be a sane act. What are we going to do? Tom asked. Asked to use the phone? They discussed stopping somewhere and trying to liberate a vehicle. Liberate was Tom's word, but in the end decided against that too. If the state line was being defended by deputies and vigilantes driving up to it in a Chevy Tahoe might not be the smoothest move. So they moved and walked, and of course, there was nothing at the state line but a billboard, a small one, as befitted as two-lane blacktop road winding through farm country. Reading, "You are now entering New Hampshire and bienvenue." I think that's French for welcome. There was no sound but the drip of moisture in the woods on either side of them and an occasionally sigh of breeze. Maybe the rustle of an animal. They stopped briefly to read the sign and then walked on, leaving messages behind. Any sense of being alone ended along with the dusty stream road. At a signpost reading New Hampshire Route 38 and Manchester 19 MI, I don't really. Michigan? I don't know what that means. There were still only a few travelers on 38, but when they switched to 128, a wide, wrecked littered road that headed almost due north, half an hour later, that trickle became part of a steady stream of refugees. They traveled mostly in little groups of 3 or 4, and with what struck Clee as a rather shabby lack of interest in anyone other than themselves. They encountered a woman of about 40 and a man maybe 20 years older pushing shopping carts, each containing a child. The one in the man's cart was a boy, and too big for convenience, but he had found a way to curl up inside and fall asleep. While Clee and his party were passing this jackleg family, a wheel came off the man's shopping cart. It tipped sideways, spilling out the boy, who looked about 7. Tom caught him by the shoulder and broke the worst of the kid's fall, but he scraped one knee, and of course, he was frightened. Tom picked him up, but the boy didn't know him and struggled to get away, crying harder than ever. "That's okay, thanks. I've got him," the man said. He took the child and sat down at the side of the road with him, where he made much of what he called the boo-boo, a term Clay didn't think he'd heard since he was 7. The man said, "Gregory, kiss it, make it all better." He kissed the child's scrape, and the boy laid his head against the man's shoulder. He was already going to sleep again. Gregory smiled at Tom and Clay and nodded. He looked weary, almost to death. A man who might have been a trim and nautilus toned 60 less. I don't know what that means. Wait, let me reread that. He looked weary, almost to death. A man who might have been a trim and nautilus toned 60 last week, and now looked like a 75-year-old Jew trying to get the hell out of Poland while there was still time. I have no idea what that reference would be. "We'll be alright," he said. "You can go home." Clay opened his mouth to say, "Why shouldn't we all go on together? Why don't we hook up? What do you think, Greg?" It was the sort of thing the heroes of the science fiction novels you read as a teenager were always saying. "Why don't we hook up?" "Yeah, go on. What are you waiting for?" the woman asked before he could say that or anything else. In her shopping cart, a girl of about 5 still slept. The woman stood beside the cart protectively, as if she had grabbed some fabulous seal item and was afraid Clay or one of his friends might try to wrest it from her. "You think we got something you want?" "Natalie, stop," Gregory said with tired patience. But Natalie didn't, and Clay realized that was so desperating about this little scene. Now that he was getting his midnight lunch, fed to him by a woman whose exhaustion and terror had led to paranoia that was unpredictable and forgivable. What made his spirits sink to his shoe tops was the way people just kept on walking, swinging their flashlight and talking low about themselves in their own little groups, swapping the occasional suitcase from one hand to another. Some yob on a pocket rocket motorbike wove his way up the road between the wrecks and over the litter, and people made way for him, muttering resentfully. Clay thought it would have been the same if the little boy had fallen out of the shopping cart and broken his neck instead of just scraping his knee. He thought it would have been the same if that heavy-set guy up there panting along the side of the road with an overloaded duffel bag dropped with a thunderclap coronary? No one would try to resuscitate him. And of course the days of 911 were done. Not one even bothered to yell, "You tell him, lady," or "Hey dude, why don't you tell her to shut up?" They just went on walking. Cause all we got is these kids' responsibility we didn't ask for, when we can hardly take care of ourselves. You had a peacemaker. What are we supposed to do when the battery runs out? I'd like to know. And now these kids. You want a kid? She looked around wildly. Hey, anyone want a kid? The little girl began to stir. Natalie, you're disturbing. Portia, Gregory said. The woman named Natalie began to laugh. Well thought, shit. It's a disturbing ass world. Around them people continued doing the refugee walk. No one paid any attention. And Clay thought, so this is how we act. This is how it goes when the bottom drops out. When there are no cameras turning, no buildings burning, no Anderson Cooper saying, now back to CNN studios in Atlanta. This is how it goes when Homeland Security been cancelled due to lack of sanity. Let me take the boy, Clay said. I'll carry him until you find something better to put him in. That cart's shot. He looked at Tom. Tom shrugged and nodded. Stay away from us, Natalie said, and all at once there was a gun in her hand. It wasn't a big one, probably only 22, but even the 22 would do the job if the bullet were in the right place. Clay heard the sound of guns being drawn on either side of him, and knew that Tom and Alice were now pointing the pistols they'd taken from the Nickersons' home at the woman named Natalie. This was also how it went, it seemed. And I'm gonna stop it here for this book reading. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.